I call the honourable member, Philip Twyford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to talk about housing in the budget. It was the missing chapter. But first, I think we have to just pause for a moment on the events of the last 24 hours, because apparently the Prime Minister thinks that there isn't a housing crisis. 3 words for the Prime Minister: out of touch. Out of touch. Clearly, the Prime Minister thinks that denial is a river that runs through Egypt. And this is the view from Planet Key. Golf courses as far as the eye can see, but you can't buy a house for love nor money. Let's just recall what the OECD said in the report that came out in the last few days. New Zealand, in the last 12 months, had the highest rate of house price inflation of all of the 34 member nations of the OECD. The highest rate of house price inflation. The OECD also said that on one of the 2 indicators that they use, that is the ratio of house prices to incomes, that New Zealand has the highest valued or most overvalued house prices in the Western world. But apparently, according to the Prime Minister and Nick Smith, we don't have a housing crisis. If you put the OECD data together with the fact that we have the lowest rates of home ownership in 50 years, first home buyers locked out of the housing market by loan-to-value ratio lending restrictions. In Canterbury, 3.5 years after the earthquakes, the slow pace of the residential rebuild borders on the criminal. Something like 60% of the above cap, that is the more expensive home repairs, still haven't been done, and people are living in totally unacceptable living conditions because of the failure of this government to expedite the rebuild. On top of that, at the low end of the market, you've got the government agencies routinely referring people to live in campgrounds. So if you put all that together, I argue, sir, that is the picture of a housing crisis. But according to the Prime Minister, we are simply victims of our own success. So the young professional couple that I met in Hamilton a few weeks back, who had moved from Auckland to get away from the high house prices so that they could buy their own home, a young family, both parents working, a good salary, they moved there the week before loan-to-value ratio lending restrictions came in. And they said to me that it will take them 5 years to save the $100,000 deposit they need to get into their home. The family who came into my electorate office last week, mum, dad, 3 kids, another one on the way. Dad's working, but they are homeless. They are homeless because they cannot get into a private rental. There is nothing available for them, and they are not eligible for a state house under Nick Smith's eligibility policies. That is ridiculous. Dad is in work, 3 kids, another on the way, and the family is homeless under this national government's housing policies. So let's talk about the budget. What did the budget do for the housing crisis? And last Friday morning, the Fairfax papers published a poll that said 76% of those polled wanted to see, more than anything else, the budget deal with the housing crisis and help first-home buyers. So what did National do? They've taken the tariffs and anti-dumping duties off varnish, nails and jibboard. And they estimate, with no analysis, no evidence to back it up, on the back of an envelope, Nick Smith thinks that that's going to knock $3,500 off the cost of a new home, with no reassurance, Mr. Speaker, and no confidence that that saving, if it in fact happens, will be passed on to first-home buyers. More than likely, in the current market, that will be pocketed by the builders and developers. What else did they announce in the budget? $30 million for social housing, which is a drastic cut to the funding of social housing. In the middle of a housing crisis, 2 budgets ago, they got over $100 million. Now, they're getting $10 million a year over 3 years. That doesn't even kick in until 2015. Nick Smith's been going around talking up what the government's going to do for social housing for the last year and a half. And the NGOs, the Salvation Army, Vision West, all the others, they're waiting for capital grants to help them get going so that they can build houses. And what does the national government offer them? the equivalent of 2 to 3 weeks house price inflation in Auckland. It offers them only enough to build 100 houses. That is pathetic, Minister, after you've been going around bragging about what you're going to do for the social housing sector and how we're going to build all these great new houses, and over 3 years you only put enough on the table to build 100 extra houses. So what else did the budget announce? $80 million. $80 million to pay the Ministry of Social Development to do the eligibility assessment work that Housing New Zealand was doing out of its baseline until recently. So Nick Smith is putting more than double the amount that he's given to the social housing sector. He's paying in a cash grant to MSD bureaucrats to do the eligibility assessment work that Housing New Zealand used to do out of its baseline. How unbelievable. On top of that, $16 million, again, not to build houses, not to help first home buyers, but to pay MSD to kick pensioners and disabled people out of their state houses. That is the National Party to a T. One of the big announcements of their budget housing policy is to pay MSD $16 million to kick people out of their state homes because they've committed the crime of earning enough as a household to afford a market rent. That says it all about housing policy under Nick Smith. But this budget shouldn't surprise us. It is just the latest cop-out from a government that has done nothing of substance to tackle the housing crisis. All they've got is a lame housing accord with Auckland Council that will deliver on their own numbers through the special housing areas, which is the centrepiece of the so-called housing accord, 5,500 houses over the next 3 years. 5,500 houses in the housing accord over the next 3 years. And yet what Auckland needs is 39,000 houses over 3 years, 13,000 a year, just to catch up on the backlog and to meet projected demand. And in the face of surging inward migration, it's going to be virtually impossible to meet that demand. And yet that's all the government has, a lame housing accord. The market alone is almost meeting the unambitious targets that Nick Smith set for the Auckland Housing Accord. What else has the government got? I don't know. It's very, very hard to put your finger on it. And he's bringing a bill back to the House this week about development contributions, which basically consists of telling councils they cannot charge developers who are building a new residential subdivision, they cannot ask those developers to contribute to community facilities that will be needed in those new communities, like swimming pools, like halls, like community centres, and under this minister, his idea of trying to reduce development contributions is forcing ratepayers to pick up the tab and subsidise new developments. That's as creative and bold as this government gets when it comes to housing affordability. Labour's agenda, sir, is to build 100,000 affordable homes for first home buyers. We will use the resources of government to intervene in what is a case of market failure. The housing market is market failure. The Labour Party will intervene. We will address that market failure, and we will stand up for first home buyers by building 10,000 affordable starter homes every year, sir. Our monetary policy upgrade will lower interest rates, unlike this government. So it's going up over 2%, according to the Reserve Bank, over the current period. 2%, it will add thousands of dollars to the mortgage repayments of struggling Kiwi households, sir. We will set minimum standards for healthy homes. We will make it a requirement that all private rental properties are warm and dry. Our capital gains tax, sir, supported by almost every mainstream economist in New Zealand now, but not by this national government, will take the steam, the speculative heat out of the market. And according to economists in the Herald today, Dominic Stevens from Westpac, he said Labour's CGT will reduce the value of a rental property for an investor vis-a-vis an owner-occupied property by 23%. That is substantial, and the Minister has nothing to say to that. We will put a stop, sir, to foreign buyers, offshore speculators, bidding up the price of houses out of reach of Kiwi first home buyers. There is a problem in the housing market, whether the Prime Minister wants to believe it or not. This is a housing crisis, and Labour has a plan to fix it.
I call the honourable member Louise